this should be working. I was trying to do a different microphone. Hopefully it wasn't as sort of gaudy as this. But this one's probably going to actually make it sound slightly better. So, hello again. Um, haven't done much super lately for a variety of reasons. But there's one thing I wanted to kind of uh, get out there, as it were, is I just watched the animated show Trese, Trese, on Netflix. 6 episodes. Just came out like the 10th or 11th of June. And honestly, uh, I freaking love it. I mean, the animation isn't going to be, Studio Ghibli or Ghibli, whichever way you want to say it, style or anything else like that. But it was really good. And there's a couple reasons why I'm, as of all the other stuff I've watched in, recently and everything else like that. There's a couple of reasons why I particularly wanted to talk about this on this sort of format for, both of you who accidentally stumble upon this video. And uh, first and foremost, to kind of get it out there and out of the way, sorry, sciences, is the idea that I think it's very important that this show is that good because it starts to show people that we don't need more reboots and remakes. And we don't need to have the same movie and the same TV show done again and again and again and again and again. Because there are very, very few times that remaking anything or rebooting anything has any positive effect to that thing whatsoever. The first thing that kind of comes to my mind is Battlestar Galactica. That's pretty much that's like the biggest sort of thing that rebooting it actually did anything to move a story along, to make it interesting, to make it sort of unique and a new thing on their own, and still were able in some ways to tie it even into their original. I was not a fan of the original that much when it came out. The one from the 2000s was freaking amazing. But that's a rare occurrence. Most of the time, we're getting these remakes and reboots and all this other stuff, and quite frankly, it's at the expense of everyone. It's at the expense of audiences. It's at the expense of actually probably a lot of money. So these studios should get their heads out of their collective asses, and it's at the expense of myriad people and creators from getting their stuff out there that and things that would do some good for people at the very least in terms of entertainment, if not actually having representation out in the world for people other than a relatively small group of people that things are being representative of. But not only that, the world is full of awesome mythology and history and stories and folklore and people all over the place making amazing art, whether that art be actually, like we were thinking about it, we say art, we think usually painting or something like that, or sculpture or music or TV or movies or comic books, all this other stuff. There's tons and tons of people whose stories and creations are not getting progressed and put out there because, and I recognize the source this is coming from, but they're not white males who are at least presenting straight and titularly Christian. I really can't fall into that last category, but I know, yeah, I get it. Um, as such, I mean, I think I can say even for me, it's like I'm bored with the same shit again and again and again. There's so much cool stuff in the world, so much cool stuff, and so many awesome and talented people that never get any sort of break because they're not this very standard sort of thing. And if anyone loses the idea of what to do with this very standard sort of pegs to put everything in, then we just, oh, something happened 15 years ago. Well, time for a reboot, time for a remake. It's bullshit. It's time for that to really need to go away. There are very few times that doing that progresses anything or anyone at all really in a real sort of context. All right. That being said, Trese is, I'm not going to go into like a full history of it because there's a lot of research that I would need to do for that to do it justice. And I'm just sort of putting this out now after having just watched the show and then the After Dark sort of talking about the show thing all on Netflix. It was created by, I think I have the names here. I want to get this right because there's a Budgetan. And he was like the writer and sort of initial idea for the creation, and the artist Kajo Bellissimo. It is out of the Philippines, and I will say this as I say it also in some of the things when I do my Tai Chi stuff and everything else like that. I'm going to just outwardly apologize for how badly I'm saying names and places and things and all this other stuff like that. I'm not trying to put on an accent to mimic or mock anything. I have a thing for me where I like to try and pronounce words and names the way they're supposed to be pronounced. As culturally appropriate as I can make it. But I like to be able to, say things correctly. As an American, that's not something we generally give a crap about, but I kind of do. It seems respectful, and it just seems like, hey, these other languages are perfectly valid, and my inability to really speak anything colloquial English is my own damn fault, quite frankly. So I shouldn't have to disrespect other cultures because because of that. Anyway, so it started as a comic, and I think they said 2005. And the creators were talking about how originally it was going to be the lead character Alexandre Trese was going to be male. Amongst the influences, beside they kind of had some badass detective sort of ideas for it, and the guy actually name dropped not only Mulder from X-Files, but Gil Grissom from CSI, which I thought was interesting. But then it was like, you know what? There's not really much female representation, so they switched Triste to be Alexandra and a woman. And and I am unfortunately very ignorant about a lot of things of the culture and cultures that would go into um, the Philippines. Again, my own damn fault. And I have heard a few of the things I talked about before. So there, Trece is they call her a Lacan, and it's their part of it's kind of like her family thing too. Is a sort of someone who's keeping the sort of balance between like the human world and they had different names for it, kind of like the underworld, where these different folkloric sort of beings reside. So they have the Aswang, which is something I've heard of before. They seem to be kind of like spirit monsters sort of things, take on a bunch of different shapes and sizes and forms and looks and all that sort of thing. They had another sort of clan of beings, the I think they were called the Tikbalang, and they're sort of like if we think of centaurs as human half from hips up and then horse from the butt back. This is almost sort of like if centaurs look like minotaurs. So they're sort of humanoid horses and stuff like that. And I guess they're tricksterish. They kind of like, race you or find you in like sort of different things of the road. And then if you kind of lost, they would go a little mad or kind of spirit you away a little bit or something like that. And they kind of updated that with like drag racing, but they also showed like the sort of head of the clan too, this huge being, which was awesome. Um, and they had a lot of other cool stuff, and Alexandra would there were spells and sigils and teleporting stuff and the use of dragon's blood, and I think there was, I apologize if I'm saying this wrongly or I have the wrong thing. There's a belete tree, and at one point, like they had a kind of a flashback where the sort of adolescent Trese had to go in there almost for her initiation, and all the different sort of like spirits and beings were kind of there, and it's just her father, her mother had died earlier in a different flashback, and sort of like, she had this knife, this curved dagger, wavy dagger, and there will be some spoilers in this, just so you know. I think I'll put it on the description as well, but just put this out there too. But it was basically, they don't go into detail from it, but it was made from her dead twin, which actually kind of comes into to play a little bit later in a different ways. I'm not entirely sure how they what mean by that. I think it takes, a couple hundred people to get enough iron. Well, this is a dagger. It takes a couple, probably scores and scores of people to make enough iron to pull enough iron out of blood to make the for the steel for a blade of the sword of your enemies. But I mean, it's magic stuff and everything like that. So, but it was like old school, uh, more culturally appropriate to the area sort of magic, and um, sort of shamany sort of thing. Yeah, someone who's kind of trying to bridge both worlds between the sort of spirit and folklorish mythological and the human world. I thought there was the cat behind me, sort of thing. So I mean, she would be pretty much a shamanist, and I guess her mom. Um, the word that they had is Babylon, Babil, Babylon, I think is what it was. It's like Babylon. It's almost like Babylon. So I don't know how much of that word came in from further west, and then would have a sort of connotation of like Babylon in terms of more Western magic sort of stuff. I don't know how that translates. I don't know the etymology of it, or if that actually has an older connection to even older um, words that came over long before um, the Europe and Western powers really started screwing with that area, with the imperialism and the colonialization and that whole sort of thing. I don't know the etymology of it, but I thought it was just an interesting sort of thing. But they're sort of more witchy seers kind of thing and everything else like that, which again, cool. All this stuff is ticking a lot of boxes for me. I mean, you got a bridge, shaman type stuff, old school, actual culturally appropriate and significant beings and magics and symbology, and all this other cool folklore mythology, especially stuff like I'm not familiar with. Man, it was super cool. And you had I can't remember the name off the top of my head, and I'm not going to try and slaughter it. But there was a whole thing. There was like a god of war that was involved. There was one guy that was sort of like an avatar for him. The way that they were getting people to almost zombify. Well, there were zombie stuff going on in with that too, and but they had to, um, but to almost like this mind control thing that they're doing was actually like carving pieces off of their body and making other people eat it or swallow it or something like that. So it's the horror comic, and there's a lot of horror aspects to everything that's going on. There were these demigod twins that were sort of, foster brothers to Trese, and their father was that god of war. And yeah, they had like comedy and tragedy masks and like nice suits, and they could fly and had like endless bullets, um, and everything like that. So there was some of the modern stuff with that with them too, but Trese just used the dagger basically. But then like had like little like kind of finding spells, which you would have like a symbol. I don't. They wouldn't be called runes. I don't think. It had some sort of like symbols that she would draw on a bottle cap, and the bottle cap would be attached to the string, and the string's attached to her finger, and it would like shoot out, and she could follow that as almost like a dowsing, almost like a dowsing sort of thing. But it was like this bottle cap on a string, and they was using that. She had a like a fire elemental called Sant'Elmo. So, which made me again, I think Saint Elmo's fire is like that. I'm guessing that's kind of one of the things that got brought over, or at least the name for it was that. But it was like this fire elemental, and it would like help her. It's in like this old mobile phone, which was that's kind of where it was like housed, and it would either come up and help her investigate, or come out and burn the blow stuff up and burn the crap out of things, which was neat. And again, you had a lot of these different beings. The war god, the different aswang. There was a sort of goblin character, Nuno, who was kind of neat. And, the Tikbalang, again, this fire elemental, all these different beings, all these different people had, which again, this is, if you've heard anything else I've said with some of these things, it was neat because it was like, okay, they weren't just, oh, well, we just have these things to be cool, but we're going to have these things basically act like human beings would act. It was like, well, no, they wouldn't. They have their own personalities. They have their own perspectives. They're not going to think like human beings think. They're not going to act the way humans being act. They're not going to have the same perception of things, or even think about, or even care to think about that. And a lot of them might be like, you need to think like us, or I don't care about a different perspective. This is just the way it is. So there's a little bit of that involved with it too, which is good because it's kind of the way it would be. You always see these different shows or movies or something like that. Oh, this vampire is 3,000 years old, but somehow is still acting like a 15-year-old idiot. Like, no. Even if whenever you get turned into whatever immortal being, your personality and things are kind of stuck there, you're still going to probably react differently, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. You're not going to act like just a regular person or something. It's ridiculous. But so they had it where they had different motivations and they had different perspectives, which was cool. Before I forget as well, the last episode, again, there's only 6. The last episode does have a post-credit scene that looks like it's setting up for hopefully season 2, and it looks like it might be somewhat vampiric. They did show, oh, what's the name? I believe it starts with an M. It's this sort of almost like kind of wraith-like monster where like the lower half is gone and like the entrails are spilling out or anything like that. They actually showed that before. I can't remember the name of it. It's one of the only few things I'd ever heard of before in different Filipino mythology and folklore. But they showed that it didn't look like that. It looked, it might be kind of like vampire-y sort of thing, which is cool. There is an English language track, and it looks like I flipped back and forth. I did a little bit of it because I was curious, and it looked like they actually tried to make the voices similar to the original language. I'll try and clarify that best I can here in a second. So a little bit more like what some places will do for like Ghibli films, instead of just, well, the person in the original language sounds like this, but maybe they're only 16 or 17, so the American one, they got to sound like this. We're not going to pay attention to what it is at all. We're just going to do this other stupid thing. Doesn't look like they did that. It looks like they took trying to put an English language track on it. They tried to take that very seriously. And they had some names of a few famous people, and I listened to a little bit of it, but again, I hate sort of dubs. I'm a subtitle guy, so I watched it mostly in Filipino. I was confused, and politely and respectfully correct me if I'm wrong, but I had found out because I was like why does it say Filipino and not Tagalog? I thought that I thought that was a language. Apparently, when I looked it up, there's subtle differences between a Filipino language and Tagalog, crossovers, but also subtle differences as well. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. I thought one thing, and it appears that I thought incorrectly about that. So um, I'm trying to make sure that I'm accurate with the information, and not just because I'm putting something online, but because it's just the right thing to do to not be a dick about other people's cultures and stuff like that. And so there is that, and just read the subtitles. Keep something in its original language. Hear the things the way they were supposed to be, the way that the creators and the people agreed, and have everything go, and listen to the damn thing the way it's supposed to be listened to. Subtitles aren't that difficult, and especially with all the streaming stuff and everything like that, they got the little 10-second thing. If you need to, just 10 seconds back, double check it. Okay, good to go. I did that a few times just because I was really interested in the names and some of the other stuff like that. But apparently, even in the English language version, like the executive producer would help out with the pronunciations, because the spells that they were using and stuff like that, they just kept them straight through in Filipino. They did not try and translate them or try and fancy them up or anything like that. There was one line that got repeated a lot that was in Latin, and but I mean that was even in the original language track. They were saying that in the Latin too, and then um, but they even kept that in the English language version, just again saying it in Latin as opposed to even translating that too. So it was all just kind of kept kind of the way it was, which again, great, because we don't really need to constantly keep sort of dumbing stuff down and um, taking away the sort of richness and diversity that other people have, just because, oh well, a couple people over here might not like that. Well, there's going to be a lot of people everywhere else that do, and I think it's kind of time that we really keep things the way they're supposed to be, as opposed to trying to cater to a handful of people who, they're not. I mean, the people who are really going to bitch about that are the people who are never going to really get stuff like this anyway, and regardless of the culture it is, because they just refuse to have anything that's not whatever their narrow, ignorant, naive view of even their own culture is going to be. There's some of the people, I'm talking about Americans who are, there's a reason why around the world, there's the phrasing ugly Americans. So you're going to have these people who are going to go to these other countries and demand everything be just like it is in the town that they live. It's like that. No. These other cultures and other peoples and other things are valid and wonderful things, and creates a richness and diversity in terms of people in our world, and being able to be exposed to that in a correct and respectful way helps make you evolve as a person. Just listen to, you can find any number of Anthony Bourdain quotes about, that whole thing about the way travel's changed him, or any of these travel people or anything like that. Um, so it's no, you got to get out of just the same crap you see day to day all the time, because the world and people are more diverse and interesting than that. And then, but there's a certain through line of humanity too, and being able to appreciate other cultures and other things that happen help you understand that through line of true, genuine humanity, kind of with the capital H, instead of just the I used the word earlier today too. I'm blanking on it right now. I used the word earlier today, or the phrase earlier today, but it's basically confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. That's what I was doing to do. If all you're doing is, well, I'm from Cleveland, and in Cleveland we do this, and if it's the same as that, then see, it's just, well, if all you're ever going to do is just be in the same place trying to find the same thing, what's the point? You can't change like that. You can't grow like that. You can't evolve like that. And there is even stuff like that in the show, because I'm did this to talk about Trese, but I'm pontificating about other stuff. But there are things about growth and change with Trese as well. It's like, hey, things were kind of done a certain way, and there was prophecies involved, and her dad kind of set things up, and he was gone at one point through most of it. As she's an adult, after she came out of the balete tree. There's apparently 5 years had passed, so she went in for like these missions and to do her sort of real initiation. Came out like 5 years later, and her dad's gone at that point in time. He had died. So there's a whole thing about her own path, her own legacy. Her dad. Again, the spoiler sort of thing. Like, it looks like her dad set things up and kind of manipulated things in a really kind of effed up way, to try and stave off a prophecy. And it might have actually created the circumstances for that to even happen, and that war god to take advantage of it. But that's the thing. It's like, if you have this one idea of how things are supposed to be, you know, what are you missing? What harm could you be doing to those that you love, or the people around you, and even to yourself, if you're one mode and you're completely into, this is the one and only way that this could be. This is the one and only way that I could possibly interpret or translate this idea of what it means to be X, fill in the blank. A man, if you define yourself by your job or a title, what does it mean to be that job or that title? You know, um, I don't know about really defining so much about jobs, because, sorry, they're jobs. A job is not an ethnicity. A job is not really an identity. It's not an orientation. A job is something that, it might be a calling, it might be a career, it might be something that's important to you and everything like that. But essentially, a job is a job. And if your response to something you've done that's shitty is, well, that's the job, you're a horrible person, and that's a shitty job. And, one of those two things, either you or the job, probably both, need to have a lot of things that are redefined. And there's some of that in with this too, because there's a whole thing, because it all takes place in Manila. And a lot of the backgrounds, apparently the animation studio that made it is Korean, but it kind of had a little bit of the sort of regular anime sort of thing, where the city and the environment is kind of a character itself too, and the people in the After Dark thing were, they were, well, the comic was talking about, this corner or this police station by this cemetery. And the one guy was like, I lived a couple blocks away from there. Like, I still live around there now and stuff like that. Like, I know exactly where this place is. They're making a joke. I think the MRT is sort of, I guess, the train system that goes through, like the rapid system or something like that. Manila Rapid Transport, maybe, or Transit, maybe. I'm guessing. I don't know. But I guess there's a joke, like, everyone's like, oh, this thing's going to break down all the time. So even in the first episode, they have it where damn thing breaks down, and it sets up this other stuff that happens. So it's part of it. You watch Sailor Moon, and there's a whole thing about, was it the Juban district and stuff like that, and the setup shots, even in like Evangelion or something, like setup shots of like of Tokyo 3 and stuff like that. But a lot of it kind of looks like old. They have the old Tokyo in there and stuff like that. So all these things have lend a a sense of the place with it too, and they tried really hard. And I thought, I mean, from my perspective, never having been there, it seemed to do that. It seemed to make that a character, seemed to give it that sort of presence as an integral part of kind of what's going on, Manila and kind of surrounding areas with it. And I'm blanking on where I was going with that. I think I need to eat. Blood sugars are low. Um, oh, but yeah, but there was a whole thing with there's kind of this whole through line in with the mayor was like super corrupt and making these really sort of awful deals with the different aswang, and the aswang, and some of them were almost like gangsters with that. So you have like sort of like mobster monsters and mobster monsters and monster mobsters, and so he's making some of these deals, and then there's a couple parts where like this one episode where uh, these cops are kind of being inundated by like these zombies, and part of it is because they did some of them did some pretty shitty stuff. Like under the mayor's orders, they kind of removed these people in these like really low income sort of shack kind of areas and like burned it down. It kind of reminded me of the story with the Torso murders in Elliot Ness in Cleveland back way 100 years ago or whatever it was. There was this shanty town, shack town by where we have the flats and stuff now, and it was like, oh well, the Torso murder, we've got to clear this out, and really what it really amounted to was this was sort of a blight on the city, and these people were always seen as less, and it was an excuse to kind of burn that out. And it was kind of like that with this, but on a couple other levels because oops sorry because of the sort of plots going on beyond that as well. Um, but this one sort of one guy who was in like one episode, his motivation for kind of helping the bad guys was because the cops like murdered his brother and were doing a lot of this horrible stuff. And there was one cop in there who was a real piece of work. Like he was abusing like the prisoner and had like this shitty attitude with even his boss. There's the main cop, Captain Guerrero, who was calling in Trese to help out when stuff got weird. Then he was the one that called her in and everything like that. And that dude was badass. If you wanted someone to be like, all right, well, this is a good definition of like a true man, Captain Guerrero would definitely be in that. He was sort of haggard and tired, but genuinely and generally and genuinely trying to make sure that the job he did was the best he could, and he cared about the other people, and was genuinely trying to be a protective person, and really, really genuinely cared. And at the end, he had some awesome scenes shooting some rockets, and it kind of reminded me of in the it was like 2003, I think, cartoon for the Clone Wars, the little mini series that came out before the sort of 3D computer animated one, so pre Ahsoka Tano, just regular 2D animated cartoon. There was one of the ARC troopers. They'd be like fire, 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 and then out of the ladder, like out of frame and running in would be one, come in, kneel down, rocket, boom, and it would just no one would say anything. There'd be this firefight, and all of a sudden, rocket guy comes in and starts blowing stuff up, and that always cracked me up. And there was a couple times where he kind of did that. Yeah, the war gods pontificating and giving all this background to Trese and everything, and then all of a sudden this rocket comes up. It's awesome. And it was Guerrero that fired it off. Um, but I mean, that he would represent. It was like, no, it's like, look, like this is it can be this way, just because other people sort of took this job and did this sort of horrible stuff with it. That's not the point of it. We're supposed to be kind of acting this sort of way. So he was a really good, sort of pseudo father figure, as well as sort of like an example of, the the people who it's kind of like worth fighting for, and would find other people worth fighting for. So kind of both ends of that. One criticism I would have of the show, again, so a lot of the animation was cool, but it's probably not going to really light you up as much. I mean, it's not bad, and I mean, it's not bad in the way it's genuinely good. There's some cool stuff. There were some cool scenes and cool things that were kind of set up, but I mean, it wasn't like, oh, like wow, the animation is really blowing me away. Like, the last season of Clone Wars, and some parts of Bad Batch. Again, when we're talking about the difference between drawn animation and 3D computer animation, but you can tell where they, over the years had upped the game and stuff like that. So I don't know if it was just maybe a money thing or just a style thing or something with the studios or something like that. I don't know. But it wasn't bad animation, but um, there was a couple of times I watched it and I was like, oh, okay. But being someone who can't draw a straight line to save his life, I really don't have much to talk about that. The major sort of critique I would have is that it got real info dumpy at the end. The last episode, when a couple of the things like, oh well, this is the real villain behind the whole thing, and this is why, and this is what was going on. It was set up a little bit. Um, I mean, I think maybe it would have seemed like a better setup if this whole thing was just one movie. But given it's episodic the way it is, it felt like it wasn't set up maybe as well as it could have been. I mean, you could probably pretty much guess, given a couple of things that happened early on, who the main villain's going to be, and stuff like that. And then there is some talk of different prophecy stuff and whether or not she is the sixth child of the sixth child, and that wasn't even really shown really well. And at the very end, it was dumped in that there's this whole thing, I guess, with twins. And the only time there's a couple of times you see something with twins. Apparently, again, Alexandra was a twin, and her twin died, and she was told she was stillborn, and then they made the dagger from the sister. And then the sort of floaty flying around demigod twins. But then it's the war god again. I'm not going to butcher his name. Um, again, was apparently marshaling some prophecy, and they kept talking about the sixth child, and they didn't really set that up. But apparently, her dad, who was trying to keep the prophecy from coming to pass, because this prophecy was the sixth child would kind of like destroy that union of between humans and this sort of underworld, other world with spirits and Aswang, and then it would almost be a kind of like an Armageddon-y kind of setup. And her dad was trying to avert that, but then it was all of a sudden apparently he and his wife had adopted these other sets of twins that maybe they could have been the ones that were in the prophecy. And then all of a sudden, oh, they're pregnant with twins, and oh, this was the one with the prophecy. And then dad killed the one sister because apparently the fifth. A lot of this is coming in at the very end. Is the fifth sister was the twin that died, but dad actually killed the sister, not stillborn, but actually actively killed the sister, because the fifth child is supposed to be this greatest fighter that's ever lived, would be the one that would wreck the crap out of everything in order to hand it then over to the sixth child. And that sixth child would be the one that would set up then the new world. It would be like, all right, these are the people that are worthy of living. These are the ones that are not, and would be the sort of the leader, the head of this next thing that comes in after that cycle. And there was a couple things that the war god said, again, all in the sixth last episode. He's talking about almost like creation and destroying. So he kind of almost, it was like a little bit of Shiva, maybe moving in with that. I don't know. Again, I don't know how much influence from some of these other places might have had on the mythology that they were pulling from for that, because they were actively pulling in from the mythology and folklore and things like that. Like, for example, there's a big thing about like a white lady sort of spirit. And, everyone either has or knows someone who has some experience with this white lady. Well, the one that they had in the show, they gave a definite origin to it and like a definite sort of thing. But they still had that in there. And so they pulled that in and these other things too. Um, but so there's little bits. There was like, oh, the sixth child. She's like, that's not me. And a little bit of maybe some prophecy. And there's some episode early on where you see flashbacks. And again, sometimes the flashbacks were a little jarring with it. That almost it didn't seem to really jive in with the modern stuff that was going on as much as maybe I would have liked. And again, this is my interpretation of this. But it seems like, in some other shows and stuff like that, if you're going to set up this person to be the main villain and you're going to use flashbacks for that, the episode or episodes that you have those flashbacks in should be pretty pertinent to that whole thing that's going on. And it didn't seem like it was as much. So it was like, oh, well, they showed these flashbacks. Was it that Chekhov gun thing? So they showed these flashbacks. So this is going to be something that's going to happen later on. Or why would they show it? Other than they're just trying to, but you could have think it was like either he's going to be the villain or all they're trying to do is show the origin of the twins. As a Crispin and I forget the other name, and they had another name for him, and it might be the Filipino or possibly, sorry, Tagalog word for twins. I'm not entirely sure. I don't really know what that is. Again, I'm doing this kind of right after watching, without having sat down and written out like a whole huge list of things like podcasty sort of thing or anything else like that. And again, like I said earlier, part of my reason for that is really to point out, hey, look, everybody, this thing was really well made and really interesting and really cool, and it's going to get people into learning about other stuff and other things. Stop rebooting and remaking everything and put more original content on, please. But so yeah, some of the stuff with the prophecy and with the main villain and that was there was little bits that were set up and kind of peppered through. It just didn't feel like it was, I guess, set up correctly. Now, to play my own devil's advocate for that, some of it might be cultural. There might be a certain way that some of these were storing, because there were I mean, it's pretty much an all Filipino project. Even the one executive producer had said there's Filipino people involved in every aspect of it. The executive producers, the writers of the show, the writers and drawers of the comics. Even when we're getting into the English language cast, they were trying to make sure there were people of Filipino descent involved with that and working on the accent for that. It was Shay Mitchell, who was in Pretty Little Liars, who's at least half Filipino, was the English language voice for Alexandra. So I mean, it was through and through, up and down, left, right, and center, rightfully so, Filipino. So there might be some cultural parts of the storytelling that, to me, as a sort of fully indoctrinated Aristotelian in terms of storytelling, admittedly, as much sort of cinema as I've watched from like China and Japan and even a little bit from Korea and things like that, and David Lynch, maybe didn't translate to me as well. So again, I'm very fully willing, ready, and able to accept that the the parts that I thought maybe weren't setting itself up as well weren't necessarily that they didn't set up as well. It was, this is sort of more culturally appropriate in terms of the storytelling and the devices that they use for that. If that's the case, awesome. If that's not the case, and it's just the way they did it, and that's just the way I'm interpreting it, then that's kind of what it is too. But I'm not gonna. But honestly, I'm gonna try and wrap this up here because I've pontificated about some of my other points enough. I want to actually talk about the show because I really like the show. It was, again, it's only 6 episodes. They're not hour episodes. Like roughly half-hour episodes, sort of thing. With that, they're really. It looked like there might have tried to be maybe a little bit of someone that they might possibly be setting up as a romantic interest for her later on. I'm not really interested in that because I think part of the reason for that is, again, if you have a female lead, the sort of romantic part of it is a real touchy subject because it could very easily just translate into, oh, look, she wasn't a complete person until she had a guy. Bullshit. So I like that there really wasn't, again, there was one person that you could kind of like, well, maybe this might be an interest for that. But fortunately, it was sort of just like a subtext at best. More, I think it was more like kind of he liked her, and she was just like, I don't care. And there was more sort of romantic development between the two demigod twins and these sort of air elemental twins that showed up in there with that. There was a little bit more with them, which is fine. Again, there are some things where I think, hey, romance is a good part of the story and fun, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. But honestly, most of the time, I'm just like, you can tell stories and have interesting things happen and feel things for people and root for them and everything, and not have to rely and shove romance up our asses every single time, every single show, every single episode, every single movie, every single thing. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love the Pixar movie Brave, because you had character development, you cared about these people and all this other thing, and it was they were sort of actively, thumbing their nose and sit and spin to romance. It's like, no, she can still be a complete, interesting, full person without having to now define herself with a prince or with this other thing. So an Alexander Trese can be an interesting, intelligent, highly, highly capable detective, not only as being a detective, but also a detective using um, outside the box sort of magical means to do it. She can interact with these beings, some of whom of immense power and or at least sometimes even just immense in terms of like a human idea, uh, capable of great violence, and still be just like, no, this is the line, this is the thing that's going to be had, this is what you agreed to. I have respect for you and everything like that, but I'm not going to be pushed around by you either, because this is how we are going to survive together. And one of I forget who it was. I think it might have been one of the show's writers was talking about his favorite scene was where Alexandra was talking to, again, the sort of head of the clan of the Tikbalang, those sort of horse beings, those sort of trickster horse beings. I mean, dude is huge too. He's like 3 times her size or more, and just in height. And he's old as hell, and he's running this whole clan and everything like that. And it was, but they were both showing deference. They were both showing respect, and she was proper and good with everything, but also still like, you know, this has got to be handled a certain way. This is what you agreed to. This is what I'm going to do. This is what we're going to do. So she still had her own power, and she still had her own sort of thing. And yeah, some of it was defined a little bit from the dad. But show me a show that doesn't have daddy issues anymore, or a Marvel movie, or a Star Wars, or anything. I mean, I don't know what we would do in terms of writing stories and everything if it wasn't for daddy issues. You know, a Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Community, Arrested Development, all these other things, daddy issues out the wazoo. Uh, but even with that, it was she also sort of made it clear. It's like, look, my dad did it this way. I'm doing it this way. I'm doing it my way. And a lot of that was her. It wasn't even necessarily her figuring out how to be her own person. It was she sort of already was. And she had gone through the trials she had gone through, and she went through some of her grieving processes for her parents and all this other thing. And then she stepped up and like, this is what's going on. And it was like, all right, well, you're telling me this prophecy is supposed to happen this way and this is my fate. No, I choose something else. And we're going to do it this other way, even if I have to kind of almost sacrifice myself to do it. You know, and she stepped up and was able to do things, you know, the way she thought was the right way to do them. And was able to show power and strength, but also, you know, being human. She wasn't like a cold robot with it either. And, you know, I think those are really important things. You know, J.J. Abrams, maybe you should pay the hell attention, and maybe you should have paid attention a few years ago, and maybe Rise of Skywalker wouldn't have been a complete and utter piece of crap if you know you didn't have to now just force a woman who's going on her own journey into just kind of being a pawn or something of anything else. In fact, Trese actually actively sort of broke out of that, you know, instead of sort of acting in with that. You know, Rey and Rise of Skywalker was, you know, all this built up in a certain way for a couple of the movies and then turned into something else at the end. Same thing, you know, George Lucas. Look what George Lucas did with Padme Amidala. You're going to build up a strong female character who's got an independent sense of justice and her own power, sort of literally and figuratively. And even if take out all the TV shows, all the Clone War TV shows, just the prequel movies, and then all of a sudden, you know, at the end, she's just too sad to live. You know, this would have been ridiculous in a Victorian Gothic novel, especially since she has twins that she now has to be responsible for because Dad's clearly not in the damn picture. But no, we have to kill her off because of stuff. I have a friend of mine who's convinced that you know, Palpatine was draining energy out of her to help Anakin live, or Darth Vader at that point in time, to help Darth Vader live. You know, and that's sort of like a retcon thing that I know that some writers have done even for Yoda to try and make Yoda not be the massive dick that he was. Um, but there are times where people can break out of that and things. And I think Treze was one of those things where it was like, no, this is, you know, my prophecy. The prophecy says this. My dad wanted me to do that. But my dad also said I've got to be my own person for it, and that's what I'm going to do. So she had that responsibility. She took it very seriously, and she did it her way, and then was able to find out and figure out and act ways to do it her way with that, and her make her own legacy for it. Which I think is really, if we're going to get to the point of all these things with daddy issues, is really what it should be about with anyway. And again, having a woman as a lead, you really need to make sure that there's not, again, some other dude's legacy that then she's kind of responsible for and picking up that legacy of that dude. Because otherwise, what's the point of her? What's the point of her journey? So that was one of the things I thought was really cool with Treze. It was, you know, again, you have that sort of strong independent woman, and a lot of times in the West, strong independent woman means, okay, it's a dude with boobs. You know, look at, you know, Laura Croft or Arya Stark. You know, I mean, just from Game of Thrones, regardless of how shitty Game of Thrones ended, you know, look at the hate that Sansa got, and I was guilty of this for a time too. Look at the sort of hate Sansa got for the way she did things, but everyone loves Arya because Arya, oh, she's a girl, but she like goes around killing people like a dude. And Sansa gets very little respect from a lot of people, even though it was, and part of that's the writers from Game of Thrones as well, because we can't have character development from a woman unless either she's acting like a boy and killing people or being raped. Those are the only two ways women can get any sort of character development. Or we're just going to kill them off because they won't let us show boobs anymore. So we have these things that are going on. So even though it was Trese isn't necessarily exactly super feminine. I mean, she's not walking around all Dita Von Teased out and of the glamour makeup and gowns and all this other thing. She's not really trying to be super butch dude or anything either. The sort of connection with the mother and the kind of the magic and shamanism from that side of the family is just as important as the stuff from her dad's side. And, even though when she comes out of the tree and her thing, she kind of does cut off part of her hair. It's not super buzzed. It's not super short. It's still kind of long. And, so that could be seen as still accepting some feminine role or something like that. But it's almost like it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even kind of come into it as a context. It's like, yes, she's a girl. Yes, she's a daughter. But I mean, even the thing with the prophecy was sixth child of the sixth child. It doesn't say that it has to be a girl. It doesn't say it has to be a boy either. So it's almost like they were treating people like actual people, whole people, and not just as a function of one part of who they are. Huh. I wonder if that could be a thing. On that note, again, it was 11 minutes past where I said I was going to stop ranting, and then I kept ranting. So, um, yes, Trese on Netflix. Watch it. I don't know if I'm ever if I'm assuming if this does well, we're going to have some access to the comics, which is something I would be excited to read. And I hope there are other seasons of it, and I hope they come out, you know, in relatively decent time. Doesn't have to be super quick because I, want some decent quality, but also I don't want to wait 3 years between seasons either. But yeah, it takes. Admittedly, I admit folklore, mythology, and sort of magic and shamany, traditional magic systems and spirits and monsters and stuff like that. All that stuff is ticks a lot of boxes for me. I've like for example, I love those parts in Black Panther where he's in like the spirit realm talking to like the ancestors and stuff like that. Like that's all stuff I'm really into. Culturally appropriate, shamanistic, animist practices and stuff like that. Like I love that. And I'm really, really happy that we were able that something of a culture that is not represented at all, really, in America, in any sort of American sort of thing. You get some Japanese stuff. There's, anime and things like that are popular. Some of like the kung fu stuff out of China and everything is popular. But, you get a couple people who maybe think they're Taoists or something like that, or promoting a bunch of stuff because they read a few things and think that they're hot shit about it now. But I mean, you don't hear anything about that. I mean, once in a while, maybe you get a Tony Jaa from Thailand making sort of things like that, and there's some things that kind of break through from there. But I mean, that's about it. From there, you might be able to know. Oh, well, I know, these three or four actors are of like Filipino descent. But when was the any other time that anything happened from the Philippines or a million other places in the world? Pretty damn rare in Western sort of storytelling and everything like that. And I mean, unless maybe you might get some gorgeous seaside resort in a James Bond movie or something like that, or you know, um, John Wick 4 might throw them in somewhere or anything like that. But most of the stuff I saw growing up in the cinema was everyone still being traumatized from Vietnam, and then all everyone, not the white guy, not the white baby boomer guy, was the villain and evil, and they were doing these horrible things and everything. Was like, well, what were we doing? How are you the hero in this with this too? What about some of the other stuff that's going on too? And I know I'm saying this never having been in that situation as well, but I'm merely speaking in the way in terms of cultural representation. Even as an American, even in our own country, let's look at the mostly lack of, and if there is, very limited and narrow and often highly incorrect representation of our own indigenous populations. Let's let's see how not super great that is. And there has to be lists on those you know whatever celebrity website. Guess which 25 actors are have Native American blood in them. You'll never guess who's really. And that's our representation. So yes, more representation from more stuff around the world. Stuff like that from and bringing in some of that old school traditional stuff into a modern thing. Great, awesome. Yes, Philippines, Guam, Indonesia, everywhere from, like Africa would be cool. South America, Central, North America, actual decent, positive representation of stories and people that we don't have and keep getting never made and just thrown out or anything sight unseen most of the time. Let's change that. I think this is something that can be a good positive representation of how that needs to change into better representation. I hope it is. Again, Trese was cool. Good job, Netflix. Thank you, those creators, for creating something cool and bringing stuff I like out, which is nice. So yeah, like, subscribe, all that other cool YouTubey stuff. And thank you for watching and dealing with me just kind of constantly talking. Ciao.